Welcome back everyone to another YouTube video, and in this video we're going to talk about the art of starving. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about starving in this game, so I'm here to talk about it. Right, so we're going to cover the reasons to starve, conditions you need to meet to starve, the difference between full starve, half starve, and temporary starve. And when I say temporary starve, I think every leader in the game can temporary starve. And what can you not starve? So, reasons to starve. Couple reasons. Denying your opponent of resources so you can eventually remove characters by battle is the most common starve strategy you'll see, mainly by decks like NL, or when you play against decks like Battle Betty. You want to stall out the game. This means that if you have like a very good card generation, such as UP Luffy, the longer the game goes on, the better it is for you. So there is reasons to starve there. Building a high life total, it's very much in reference to cards like 9 cost Yamato, 5 cost Gidatsu, and 2 cost Hino Bird Zap. Typically played in L, can be played in any yellow deck. The other one that comes to mind is Queen. Playing around certain cards. So what does this mean? I'll talk about a little more about this in the temporary starve part. Is that I'm starving my opponent. Let's say I'm playing against Green Zoro, right? I'm on my 4 down turn. They're on their 5 down turn. I've yet to see them search like a 5 cost Tashigi or 5 cost Cavendish. Depending on the deck you're playing, maybe you shouldn't swing into them. So they have less chance of seeing it if you're going to play a 4 cost that's very, very important, like 4 cost Kuzan. Playing around leader effect. So, this mainly refers to things like, the Bell Betty leader effect. Like they have a lot of triggers that come into life. Playing around leader effect, like, for example, if I'm playing against blue, yellow Nami with 8 cards in hand, if I swing into them, they're going to counter, go down to 7, next turn draw for turn, going to be 8. The card they play out is going to put them back down to 7 cards in hand, which means that they can draw again. And just little things like that you need to be very aware of when you starve. Right, conditions to starve. So your deck needs to be a removal based deck for you to kind of starve your opponent, and this is referring to the full starve and the half starve, such as like Emu, UP Luffy, NL, Queen, and all sorts. You need to have either infinite resources or infinite life. So in the case of UP Luffy, you have both, right? You're drawing 2 cards a turn, you have Gum Gum Giant as infinite counter, and you can heal with 9 Mom in the past. Obviously that card's banned now, so it's a lot less viable for that deck to starve, but I still think the deck can starve certain decks. Infinite life. UP Luffy seemingly had infinite life. Decks like NL and Queen has quote-unquote infinite life, because the amount of healing. And even the new deck coming out in OP13, Emu, it has infinite life in the card called Workery. And I know it doesn't technically heal, but it's a blocker that can be removed that draws a card, so essentially it's a heal one. You need to be able to kill your opponents within a few turns once you've reached the late game, especially if you're stacking your opponent's life. If you're going to starve, you need to be able to kill them in 1 or 2 turns. This is mainly because when you decide to hit the go button, it's usually going to be time on round, a lot of the time, so you need to be able to kill them fast. If you don't do this, you give decks like Green Zoro ways to come back by just swing 15 on your board and swing, right? And clearing 2 bodies that turn. So, for example, right, NL takes a while to kill your opponent once you reach the late game because you play 1 thing a turn. Decks like Queen and Up Luffy play two big bodies a turn, which means they can sometimes kill their opponent faster. And the new deck Emu, which can also starve, they play out 5-7Ks. Usually they can one-shot you in 1 or 2 turns as well. Full Starve. This is the most common one that everyone uses. This is, you never attack your opponent's life. You just run them out of resources, stack them up to a lot of life. Eventually, you'll be able to battle over the board and then kill them. This strategy does have some downfalls. The moment you swing out your board, because they're on high life total, they can just swing at your board, and then the game can go on and on forever. So against like a really good player, Full Starve is a lot less viable. But at like a locals level, I think Full Starve is probably the strongest thing you can do. Yeah, this is a deck. I say you can only do this if your deck has infinite resources. You can have a lot of resource generation. You know, decks like NL, decks like Queen. Queen, even like nowadays, not so much. You can't really Full Starve with that deck anymore. But we'll talk about that later. In Half Starve, Half Starving is you're swinging with your leader every turn, but you're not swinging with your board. Queen against Blackbeard is a very common example that I would make, or even things like NL against Blue Yellow Nami, or NL against Kagara sometimes, depending on your list. The reason is because you're swinging with your leader and not your board every turn, you're still putting pressure and trying to get cards out of their hand or make them take life. But the biggest difference is your opponent cannot swing at your board back. So you can make your opponent rest their board first, and then you swing at your opponent's board with your own board and then try to kill them. So why is this beneficial? If I swing out with my 5/6 body, let's say Gidatsu, when they swing at it and I'm on 3 life, it means I'm not drawing an extra card from life and I have to spend a card to defend my Gidatsu, and you just lose card advantage. You start swinging out your board once you have like a massive hand, maybe when you're at 1 life or we've healed, when your board is wide enough. So you have generate yourself. So Queen is a very prominent Half Starve deck where you swing with your leader every turn to try to get cards in their hand. If they do take a lot of cards, it means that your Yamato is not as useful. However, because you're a blue deck, you have things like the 4 cost pudding that they have to play around. With Queen, the reason it's a Half Starve deck rather than a Full Starve deck, because the moment you swing your board is going to be gone. So in the late game, you can very easily lose your whole board. And why is that? Queen needs to have 4 cards plus life to be able to heal, which, you know, very risky, but this was like the premier Starve deck back in the day, and it's kind of what the deck is built around. Queen versus Blackbeard, great example. Blackbeard was one of the decks that Queen could not Full Starve back in the day in OP10. OP10 was when this deck, in my opinion, was a top tier deck, but obviously didn't see any tournament tops, just because of a lack of play. Blackbeard was a deck that you couldn't exactly Full Starve unless you Giga High Roll, and they really low roll. Because your removal, unlike Kingdom Come, Red Rock bottom decks, so no matter how many 10 cost Teach you clear, or however Burgesses you Gravity Blade, they're going to find them again and play them. And if you're Full Starving, they're just going to kill you, unfortunately. So it's a deck that you have to Half Starve, and you just chip cards in their hand every single turn and try your best. And it's a pretty 50-50 matchup if you know how to Half Starve correctly. And I think Half Starving is a very important thing. And this kind of ties in with the next topic, which is Temporary Starve. Every leader in the game can kind of Half Starve, or Temporary Starve I like to call it, for a small period of time. Usually you stop swinging with your board for like a couple of turns, because you know you're running out of cards in hand and you don't want to swing your board. But most of the scenario is that you're going to prevent your opponent from gaining resources temporarily. One of the examples I would make is that let's say I'm playing Green Zoro, my opponent is playing Silver's Rayleigh. They're on 0 cards in hand, 2 life, and I cleared their board, but I'm at 0 life, right? I have, like, let's say I have a Tashigi and a Cavendish still to swing, so I can put them to 0. But I cannot kill them that turn. If I swing out, they will have 2 more chances to draw the 0 cost unblockable event, which is not good for me. But if I don't swing, because I know for a fact mathematically he is dead next turn no matter what, he only sees the card he draws for turn, which is a lot less likely to be the unblockable event. And that's like the key of Temporary Starve. You need to know when to stop swinging. It's a little bit more game knowledge concept, but preventing your opponent from seeing a key card in the next turn from a top deck, they draw one rather than draw 2 or 3 that they give them. And another one example of a Temporary Starve is back in the day when you played Katakuri against Blue-Black Sakazuki. As the Katakuri going first on that 3-Don turn, you really should not be swinging, because Sakazuki is going to be playing out 4-cost Kuzan next turn, and which you can clear with 5-cost Giratsu. Usually if that play resolves, you just win the game on the spot, which it's kind of considered Temporary Starve. A lot of decks that even in the matchups that I play, when I play decks like NL deck and Full Starve, but I'm playing against a deck that takes their own life, I would not swing out my first swing on my 3 or 4 Don turn. I will still Temporary Starve them, just so they have less chances to see cards they need to high roll me in the next turn. And what can you not starve? So decks that don't run out of resources, like UP Luffy, you cannot starve. Even decks like Vivi and Rebecca, those leaders aren't exactly the most common thing in the world, but they're also leaders that have infinite resources and card generation that you can't really starve. All the other blue decks is kind of fine. Decks that take their own life, whether that is like a very conventional way, like Purple Luffy, or Yellow Calgara, that deck, the cards just say take your own life, you can't starve me, haha. To decks like Hody Jones and Green Blue Rosinante that you just cannot starve because they take life in very unconventional ways. Hody, all the Fishman Pirates cards take their own life, and Rosinante, they just block and they take a life, right? There's probably a lot more leaders that I'm not thinking of at the top of my head at the moment, but those 4 are kind of examples of no decks can starve those leaders. Decks that play problematic characters, and what do I mean by that? What I mean is, if your deck cannot remove 4-cost Burgess, 5-cost Kuzan, or the big problem in the room, 7-cost Croc and Mihawk, that just says your board cannot be removed, right? Anti-removal means that starving is not really an option. If they're a good player, they will just play out their whole board active, and not swing it out, and they'll just kill you in 1 turn, which, yeah, can't starve those. But if we're talking about decks like let's say Green Yellow Law, okay, that's another deck that takes its own life, you can't starve. That's a bad example. But when I say anti-removal, you cannot starve, I don't mean like 2-cost Burgess, 3-cost Tashigi, or like 2-cost Kyoshiro. Those decks you don't really, you just remove them first, right? More talking about the cards that say cannot be removed. And another one with problematic characters is that if your deck struggles to remove 10-cost characters or 9-cost characters, in the case of like 9-cost Zoro or 10-cost Shanks, you cannot really starve those decks if you're expecting them to come down and they're playing in a way that is going to be able to drop them down, and you can tell that their whole game plan is play nothing until they hit 9 or 10 cost. That's when you cannot starve them. And generally, decks with a better late game than your deck, decks like Mono Black Lucci from OP07, 10-cost Kuzan is a big problem no matter what deck you're playing, unless you're specifically in this list of leaders that can starve. Unless you're specifically Emu, you don't really care. Even with UP Luffy, unless you're on like multiple copies of Gum Gum Red Rock, starving Lucci is very hard, because once a Tenzan hits the field and they're on 5 life, you've lost the game on the spot. that is everything I have to say about starving. Hopefully this really helps. There's a lot of misconception about starving. Every leader in the game can starve, some better than others. But I talked a lot about Emu in this video. If you guys want to see me try to build a starve list for that deck, which that deck can absolutely play full starve, and some leaders will be, you can obviously some leaders like Roger, it's impossible to starve with that deck. But let me know, and hopefully this helped. Leave a comment, like, and subscribe with a shameless plug, and see you guys next time. Bye.